opinion on Sky News Australia starts now. This is Outsiders.
Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the show that is to woke virtue signalling, anti-Semitism and identity politics on steroids, what the leaders of Hamas are to telling the truth.
It was a military operation. It was directed for military purposes, for the military sites.
Well, hundreds of civilians were killed.
And for the military soldiers who imposed sanctions and collective punishment against our people.
Okay, it was a military operation against collective punishment. That's how Hamas describes, well, the brutal rape, torture, kidnapping, murder and decapitation of innocent women, children and babies. In other words, civilians. Did we hear that correctly?
But I can confirm and assure again and again that there was no command to kill any civilian.
How interesting. According to this captured terrorist who actually carried out the attacks, that's a complete lie. He even gave the name of the Hamas leader who ordered him and his fellow terrorists to murder civilians.
قالكوا يعني من القيادة اقتلوا المدنيين.
احنا اللي كان يحكي لنا محمد نهض البطش مسؤول المجموعة.
Yes, admitted that he was told to go and kill civilians. That's a bit awkward, isn't it? But let's go back and see how our brave Hamas spokesperson copes with awkward questions.
You justify killing people as they sleep, families. How do you justify killing hundreds
I
of
want
people
to stop this interview. I want to stop this interview.
Oh, I want to stop. Let's stop this interview. Come on, let's. Oh, dear. Oh, we're walking out here, aren't we now, Rita and James? Let's stop the show. How dare you? Now let's grab the latest Outsiders news. So, Rita and James, that voice still echoes around and reverberates. We've got all sorts of shenanigans going on in Victoria, who seem to have ignored the fact that there was a referendum and that no won it, Rita.
Well, yes, we're pressing ahead with our treaty. The absolutely hopeless Victorian Libs have failed to withdraw their support. They're now sitting on the fence. That's about as strong a position as they would like. Meanwhile, you've got Victorians increasingly being banned from, activities like rock climbing on certain mountains, because apparently that's not the done thing anymore. There's more and more areas of the country that are becoming for the exclusive use of one set of people.
Out of bounds for white people.
Verboten. And, this is very interesting.
Not just white people.
Yeah, non-Indigenous.
Non-Indigenous people, because, of course, we're not saying race, we're saying Indigenous still.
Oh, yeah, they're different things, aren't they? That's right.
Apparently,
it was explained, yes. It's all to do with how long you've been here, Rita. Check your watch. I've only been here for a couple of years. You're not worth...
You know what? Maybe that's why the migrants didn't like the voice too much, because we're the ones who got here last. So if you're granting privileges based on who's got the longest line of ancestry, it's not very welcoming to the migrant community.
I'll tell you what, Rita and Rowan, the interesting thing about this here is that this shows that the ideology behind the voice has not been defeated. The voice itself was defeated, but what you're talking about here, Rita, is a situation where the left believes that Australia is an illegitimate state, that it's a colonial settler state, that there needs to be multiple sovereignties. We've seen all of that. And there's this whole idea, we're seeing it play out around the world, that in any society, the people who got there second last are the legitimate people to be there. Doesn't matter who else came before or after. It's the most recent previous inhabitants. But this whole thing, besides the fact that for these camping bans and mountain climbing bans, they put me in a very invidious position, because I don't think anybody should want to go camping or mountain climbing. That sounds like hell on earth to me, and yet I have to defend the right to do it. What I also think, though, is fascinating is we're also seeing now still this kind of Trumpian line from the Yes campaign, people like Thomas Mayo saying, oh, it wasn't because of a bad idea that it lost, it was because of misinformation. And we're seeing Thomas Mayo and people like this still pushing this idea, and we're going to see the government pushing its misinformation bill still to try and censor what you can say, what people can say online, and try and get the social media
I think I've got to stop you there. I think that's
people.
The first time Thomas Mayo has ever been accused of being Trumpian. I don't know where that comes from.
That is an interesting analogy.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. But the reality is that what Thomas Mayo is laying the groundwork for is Labor's misinformation and disinformation bill. This is the thing where they're going to monitor social media, and I'll be talking about this later in the show, how it works, this roundabout way where they get the big tech companies to censor you, but they're really doing it on behalf of the government. It's the most obscene and corrupt behaviour, but that's what our Labor government's got planned for you and for your opinions. Rita?
And we've already seen that. We saw that during the worst of the COVID era, and this became apparent after Elon Musk bought Twitter, now X, and saw the way it was systematically censored. Real information, credible information from credible scientists that was anti-lockdown, that questioned some of the restrictions
vaccines
that we were all being, some of the vaccine mandates. It was all censored, including in this country, and to the detriment of all of us. So to go down that
100%.
road
Well, and so, Rita, this is where, to bring it back
sinister.
to the, this Indigenous issue, in Victoria now, there's a calls to bolster what are called the culture police.
I couldn't believe it's culture
these
police.
culture police would have the right to enter people's private property, such as farms and houses in Victoria, without the owner's permission to check to see if there's been violations committed of Indigenous cultural sites or heritage or land or any of that sort of thing.
This is Orwellian.
This is what happens.
Really...
It's Orwellian, and this is where it goes. The same mentality. People always look at these things sort of in isolation. COVID, The Voice, all these. It's all this thread of statism, and it's this thread of control, and a thread of anti-freedom, and a thread of, I think, really cracking down on ordinary Australians who just want to live their lives and tell them how they are supposed to live. Rita?
This is the left's march, and it's always the same people, whether it's global warming, whether it's race issues, BLM marches or Invasion Day, or whether now you're seeing people taking to the street for the Palestinian cause. It is the same people in almost all the cases. The same group of people pushing, like James said, this anti-West agenda, this push to say we're not legitimate, this is an evil country built on racism.
I was hoping when I saw...
And when you say something like culture police, I get chills. I came from a country where there's a morality police, and they go around checking to see if women are wearing their hijabs properly, and if they're not, they get beaten up and taken to jail. Sometimes they get killed. So when you're talking about anything like this, alarm bells start ringing, and they should start ringing for everybody.
Well, when I saw the phrase culture police, James, I was hoping that they'd be down to the Archibalds and a few modern art centres and basically removing anything that was painted or done since the 1970s onwards. But that's a different thing. But you're right, Rita, this is really sinister stuff. Of course, it's come out of Victorian Labor. Culture police wandering around and checking whether you've somehow done something wrong to Aboriginal culture. We saw in WA that bill... partly thanks to this show, by the way, having to be withdrawn, in which if you dug up a few kilograms of dirt, you were offending the rainbow serpent or whoever it was. But this sort of stuff, James, and this is really disturbing. Jacinta Price had a great article in The Australian yesterday saying that although, the no case won, you've suddenly got all this stuff going ahead, treaties and everything. It's like they've just completely ignored the result of the referendum, and they intend to push it through. And this is undemocratic. The one that made me laugh the most was this concept. I don't know if it is a joke. If it is a joke, well done to Labor for having a good sense of humour. I'm impressed. They're suggesting Linda Burney as our next Governor-General. Now, that I thought was a great one, a great gag.
Well,
I was hoping someone was taking the mickey with that one. But this is what you do in Labor.
Rowan.
You reward the person who did a really bad job by giving them a really important job.
Rowan, I got to stop you there. This would be, Linda Burney as Governor-General would be the most brilliantly cynical move by Labor. Think about it. They would, A, move Linda Burney, who failed at her job to get the voice anywhere, near even 50% as the Indigenous Australian minister. Her own seat voted against it. She was a woeful performer in Question Time. I watched her every day of Question Time during that, and she simply could not answer basic questions on it in return to the most basic sort of dot points. Her staff should be sacked for that stuff. But put her in the Governor General's role, and all of a sudden, well, it's a great thumb in the eye to the monarchists, because you've got this move to then now make this now an office held by an Indigenous Australian, and then it will then be a push to move that republic and that agenda through another means.
Yeah, you're right. And what this Matt Thistlethwaite character, the Minister for the Republic is now dead as Monty Python's Norwegian blue parrot. So what's he going to do? So you're right. This is another move towards the Republic. It never stops. Labor never stops. We've got to get rid of Labor, get them out at the next election, get a coalition government in, and hopefully a better one than the last coalition government. Sorry, Rita. And
hopefully we start seeing, because of The Voice, some backbone in some of our politicians. You talked about this agenda going ahead despite the people being very clear in where they stand on this issue. Well, a big part of that is the calibre of Conservative politicians in this country. Yep. Now, we saw in Queensland, as soon as the opposition there said, we withdraw our support for the treaty, what did Anastasia Palaszczuk do? Said, we ain't having a treaty, because she's not silly. She knows there's an election coming up, and she would be absolutely trashed.
And let's say congratulations to Chris Staffuli, who's the Queensland Liberal opposition. We slammed him very hard when he went in for the treaty, but he opposed The Voice, and now he's opposed the treaty as well. So well done. That's the way for Liberals to go. It's called being in opposition. You oppose. That's what you do, and then you win. That's how you win government, guys.
You're missing New South Wales, though. New South Wales, which is a disaster on this front here.
Totally.
Chris Minns, the Labor Premier, has walked back from the treaty. He said that's not happening until after the next election. He's just putting that over to the side. At the same time, we haven't heard anything from the leadership of the Liberal Party.
Mark Speakman
in New South Wales,
supporting The Voice.
Who supported, he supported The Voice, even though the state went majority against it. The overwhelming majority of Liberal Party members
wanted against it. So what's he doing in a job, James? Why is he still in a job? Get rid of the guy.
Well, maybe it's 2 words, Matt Keane.
Well, that's it. I mean, Matt Keane had a big part to play in the fall of Dominic Perrottet, and I think he's going to do that.
Which we predicted on this show. The moment Dominic Perrottet said that Matt Keane was his sidekick, we said on this show, that's the end of Dominic Perrottet. That's the end of the Libs in government in New South Wales. We were correct. When are the Libs going to learn? Well, hopefully they have learned under Peter Dutton. But whether you're listening to Simon Birmingham, or you're listening to Matt Keane, or you're listening to Mark Speakman, you are doomed to fail. That's how you lose, by listening to the bedwetters. If you want to win, you oppose Labor. Seems pretty simple, James.
Well, exactly right. But, Mark Speakman, when I spoke to his office at the start of this whole debate, they said, oh, well, he looked at this from a barrister's point of view, and I thought, there's an alarm bell, because who does that remind you of? and then they said, oh, well, it's legally safe. Well, that's not really the issue here.
No,
exactly. Striking a treaty, nations.
Well, he was talking about The Voice, but yeah.
You don't have people striking treaty with their own people, and it's in Victoria. You say New South Wales is a disaster. At least Minns has walked back from this and is going to wait till the next election, at least to have some sort of a mandate to press ahead. Victoria, we know there is no mandate because 55% of Victorians said no, and yet we've got the coalition who are so weak that they are refusing to say, we withdraw our support. If they press ahead and continue down this road, we're going to reverse it if we
So Janet Albrechtsen, sorry guys, Janet Albrechtsen had a phenomenal article in the Weekend Australian yesterday, which everybody should go out and look at, talking about how the legal establishment in this country has not given up on this fantasy of treaty. And at the heart of it,
there's a lot of money.
But at the heart of it is an ideology that says Australia is illegitimate.
And that's the point.
And that
we've
they
said
want
that
settlements,
all
treaties,
along.
and this background agenda has not stopped. So what I'm saying is people cannot think, oh, no, got up, that's done and dusted. No, it's all there. And you know what the crazy thing, too, is we see echoes of that now echoing into the streets of Sydney and around Australia with all of the arguments around what's happening in Gaza and the Middle East, which is actually quite connected because there's a very similar agenda of anti-civilization going on here.
Well, I can tell you at the Palestinian rallies, you'll see plenty of Aboriginal flags. You'll hear a welcome to country or acknowledgement of country. And certainly last weekend in Sydney, the speeches were all about decolonisations, the evils of imperialism and colonialism. So the same themes.
And yet,
100%. We've actually got to the point, I think, which The Voice exposed, which is really good. Australians have to realise that there is basically an attempt to make our British heritage, our Australian Commonwealth, illegitimate, and to replace it with some Marxist entity built around indigeneity. Australians have to wake up because they're coming for your property rights. They're changing the names of your streets and town. Now Sydney Airport's called something else.
What?
And on.
What?
Yeah, it is. You go to Sydney Airport, it's now called something or other, Gadigal or something. You know, and you try and know where you're going to fly to out of Queensland, and it's a bunch of indigenous names, which is fine of itself, but it's what it represents. It represents an attack on the sovereignty and the legal framework of this nation. Your land rights are not safe if we go down this route. Well, let's move on.
I just want to say there's one point here, though. This whole thing about this fight about turning everything into a sort of a Marxist conflict about the dispossessed and the occupier. This is the great lie here that's going on here, because when it comes to the indigenous issue, they say history goes back 60,000 years. When it comes to the Israel issue, they say history goes back 75. And the Jews do not have thousands of years of heritage in that part of the world.
It's not about that. There's no consistency. There's no principle. All it is that classic Marxist ideology of the oppressor and the oppressed.
Yes.
So the Jews being successful, they're the oppressors. The Palestinians are the downtrodden, oppressed, and that's as far as they look. This is
but it goes beyond that. It goes to white versus any other colour. That's the heart of it.
Well,
let's not beat about it. No, it is, because you listen.
You put an Arab and an Israeli next to each other, they look the same.
Yes,
in most cases.
but in the eyes of the Marxists, the Israeli is white. That's how they always try to frame it.
You know, Rowan,
and the academic definition. I heard some clown on 2GB the other day talking about all racism is to do with power and prestige and prejudice, and you can only have racism you can't have racism against whites, is the argument.
But a very important thing.
What it boils down to. And the argument is that colonisation is the great evil, and therefore anything where you can point to some version of colonisation, that is what you attack. But let's go to Gaza. Let's talk about what's happening there, because in Israel at the moment, Netanyahu's come out and said he is fighting an existential war for a second war of independence, for Israel to survive, to exist in a sea, amongst a sea of Arab nations. It's pretty horrific what is going on. I'll be talking to Quanta Ahmed shortly. She's there in Tel Aviv, where the sirens have been going off. The war has begun. From my point of view, it is absolutely critical that Israel gets in there and destroys Hamas for once and for all. They have every right to do so. They have every legitimate right. And all the counter-arguments claiming that somehow the Jews are responsible for genocide, which you're hearing at all these rallies around the place, are completely outrageous. Well, here's Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel.
Our fight inside the Gaza Strip will be long and difficult, but we are prepared for that. This is our second war of independence. We will fight for the protection of our homeland, and we will fight on the ground, in the air, in the sea, and we will eliminate the enemy above the ground and beneath the ground. We will fight and we will win, and this will be the triumph of good over evil, light over darkness, life over death. And in this war, we stand together firmly, united more than ever, certain of our just way.
And there is no question, doesn't matter what people tell you, there is no question that Israel has every right not only to defend itself, but to destroy Hamas, who have committed, as I'll be chatting to Quantum Armand shortly, genocide against the Jews on October 7th. That's what it was. It was a crime against humanity, and it has to be fought, and those responsible have to be destroyed. But what is interesting, Rita, is how it's playing out here in Australia. There are demonstrations, protests, etc., etc. The obscenity of people rushing out and basically ignoring what happened to those 1,000 murdered, raped, etc., women and children and civilians, and coming out claiming, oh, no, it's the Palestinians who are suffering. Let's have a look. It's interesting, Rita, because apparently Bibi Netanyahu has yet to speak to Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, and there might be a reason for that. Have a listen to this grab which Sharry Markson uncovered. Yes, that clip was of Anthony Albanese a few years ago, Rita.
Well, it's not really surprising. We know there's cabinet ministers right now, never mind things from the past, cabinet ministers right now who are very wary of saying anything that will upset segments of their Muslim electorates, because they rely on that electorate for votes. And I think they sell that electorate short. There are plenty of Muslims in this country who have a nuanced view on this. But I think the Labor politicians have presumed that, no, if we say anything in defence of Israel, or if we categorically slam Hamas and the attacks and say Israel has a right to defend itself and to exist, then we're going to have a backlash from this electorate. I don't think that's necessarily
not
the
a
case.
single Muslim organisation in Australia has come out and criticised, let alone condemned Hamas.
Well, of course not. And, you know, they're absolutely on the song sheet with much of the Labour Party, with the entire Greens Party, with independents like David Pocock. It's almost as if it's the Teals. It's almost as if there's this memo that's gone out that says, you know, and you see them all tweeting the same thing. Israel has turned off the communications so nobody can see what they're going to do. They're setting up this narrative, which is right out of the Hamas propaganda office, you know. Unwittingly or not, that's what they're doing. Now, the really interesting thing, though, yes, Anthony Albanese helped found Parliamentary Friends of Palestine. He has a long issue on this. The really interesting thing to me, though, is that the old Labour, and there's only a few people like Bill Shorten, give him credit on this, who have sensible views on this, who are willing to, you know, come out and say, no. Israel's in the right here. You cannot side with Hamas even tangentially on this one. But people like Tony Burke, it's very interesting because, you know, he had that preacher in his electorate who was celebrating the attacks, and he didn't come out, you know, right away on that one, and he tried to both sides it with Patricia Karvelis the other day. The really, really interesting thing, though, is I think Rita makes a great point, and that is, you know, get out of the electorates of Sydney and, you know, in the West. Talk to people in the Arab world, and their views are much more nuanced. I've been speaking to people in the Gulf states who are telling me that the feelings about this conflict are, you know, they don't want to see Hamas win because that's Iran, and that's not
ISIS.
Good for anybody.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've got to say that we've highlighted Anthony Albanese's Friends of Palestine, but guess who was the co-chair of that? Susan Ley, and she's made some statements in the past that are very questionable indeed. But it's interesting that we're seeing these rallies, more than 100,000 in London overnight, rallies in Melbourne and Sydney. Why are they calling for Palestine to be freed of Hamas? Why can't I see banners saying Hamas is evil.
Yeah, Freed of Israel, I mean. Yeah.
Hamas are terrorists. We are not. Why are they focused solely on Israel? Why is it the only Jewish state that is held to
they're on your screen. They're on your screen. There's
This is
100,000 people in London marching, pro-Palestinians marching in the streets of London. 100,000. Now, as Rita says, free Palestine. Gaza is not occupied by Israel, folks. Wake up. Gaza is run by a dictatorship, a terrorist dictatorship. So, I mean, what our kids are being taught is just a disgrace. But, James, just want to play you a clip of Tony Burke justifying a council in Western Sydney raising the Palestinian flag. And what spot the moral equivalency, folks? Here it comes, served up on a dish.
Canterbury Bankstown Council has voted to raise the Palestinian flag until a ceasefire is declared in Palestine. That's in your electorate. Do you support it?
I support the decision completely. You need to understand, in my part of Sydney, people are watching every day death. They're watching every day images, sometimes of people they know, often of children. I had a professional woman say to me the other day, she has never seen so many images of dead babies in her life.
Well,
no word for the massacred
this is
Jewish babies
and it would have been interesting,
Rowan.
It would have been interesting, Rowan, if Patricia Karvelis had then gone on to ask the question, what about the hostages? Do you think the hostages should be freed? Because that's a question that people aren't talking about, and that's something I'm going to be talking about a bit later in the show on that. But,
where are the banners of these protests? Free the hostages. I mean, why is there no focus at all?
Because it's really fascinating, because I remember when Iran when the Ayatollahs took over in Iran in 1979, and they took a bunch of American hostages prisoner in the American embassy in Tehran. That was every single day. Those hostages were in the paper, in the news. And now we don't even think about it. It's like Israel and Jews have been delegitimized as occupiers in this very Marxist sort of equation. And Rowan, here's the interesting thing. Here's the interesting thing about this, too, is now the left is in a really dangerous position. All of these people now who are taking tacitly even the side of Hamas on this, not calling for the release of prisoners, not calling for the liberation of Palestine from their failed leadership, they are now throwing in with people who have broken all of the bonds of morality. And this goes back to this thing Frantz Fanon, who was a French psychologist, talked about the need not only for there to be decolonization, but revolutionary violence to decolonize. I am very concerned about where this winds up.
Because guess who else are occupiers? We're occupiers.
Exactly.
Can I just say quickly, we talked about Bankstown Council raising the Palestinian flag. The Palestinian flag, not just one, but multiple, were flying in the centre of Melbourne at Federation Square. So again, imagine you're a Jew in that city, how you would feel not just having protests, but having those flags flying during this conflict.
Absolutely. Now, I just wanted security experts were left extremely concerned this week after the Albanese government decided to leave the port of Darwin in Chinese hands. What's going on in the world? Well, joining us now is the Director of Strategic Analysis of Australia, Michael Shoebridge. Michael, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning. The port of Darwin, so that's going to stay in Chinese hands, leasehold. What did you make of it?
I can't see this as anything but a temporary and bad decision. I think it really needs to be seen in the context of the Prime Minister's visit to China to shake the hand of Xi Jinping, and he didn't want anything to ruffle the pond. This decision leaves the key strategic asset in the middle of Darwin Harbour, our northernmost port, in the hands of a Chinese company at a time when Australia and our allies need to make best use of that port. So it's a very poor strategic decision.
So presumably, Michael, the Americans can't have been desperately impressed while Albo's wandering around with his ill-fitting suit and tie, wandering around the White House. They can probably been even less impressed when they saw us handing a strategic military asset to the Chinese at the same time as we're trying to get the AUKUS subs deal through.
Exactly. If you remember, back in 2015, we sandbagged the then US president with this decision, who found out after the peak Australia-US security meeting. No one told him then. And now again, just days before the Prime Minister goes to Washington, we do it again. So we're looking like we're all hat, no ranch when it comes to military cooperation in the north.
James.
I want to move on to the discussions also about AUKUS that occurred over the week in Washington, and concerns that the deal will not go through because it's going to be scuttled potentially by Republicans, but also concerns here that by building them in Adelaide, we're going to get them too late, and we're turning this into an industrial policy rather than a defense policy. And I want to get your thoughts on where you think the future of AUKUS is going from here.
Well, James, anyone that thinks that Congress passing any laws now secures AUKUS is wrong. And we don't even know if the Congress will pass the laws that Biden wants that start to enable AUKUS. And the problem is the American submarine production system is under enormous pressure that gets worse right when we want them to hand their rare submarines over to us. As the best way to get submarines is to help the Americans build more. Trying to talk about submarines as a jobs program in Adelaide is a fundamental error. These submarines are about military power and security, not about Adelaide jobs.
Okay.
And just on this topic of naval warfare and preparedness, just to go into history, do you find any troubling parallels between today and, say, the 1930s, when, of course, there was also a great battle in Britain to get the Navy up to snuff? Are you seeing troubling parallels historically with this battle to get naval strength up to snuff?
Absolutely. You look at the American plans, they want to get to about 360 major surface ships, and instead their fleet is shrinking. It's the same story with submarines. With Australia, we've talked a really big game about naval shipbuilding since 2017, and the Navy hasn't got a single ship for the billions of dollars spent. So our actions are not matching our words.
Well, we know Airbus Albo is going to be going to China next month. What are your feelings about the timing of that visit, and what does he hope to achieve?
Well, it's probably good it came straight after the Washington trip, because he will have had some very serious briefings from American intelligence agencies that hopefully he will take to heart. But really, he can't look like he's rewarding Xi for stop hitting us with sticks. So Xi has taken hostages. Now he's released one. Yang Hengjun is still a hostage. He's apparently going to start letting Chinese consumers buy our wine again. But really, these are all things, punishments that China put against Australia, and now we're meant to celebrate the fact they've stopped temporarily.
100%. Michael, the cover of The Spectator this week has a gag about the Darwin Awards. The Darwin Awards, of course, are those awards that are handed out to people who stupidly self-annihilate themselves. How stupid is Australia being, and how dangerous is it to give the Imperial Communist Navy of China a port up there on our northernmost flank?
It's an enormous own goal that we seem to want to keep scoring. We should take back the ownership. It's not even an expensive proposition. And then we should use that port for the collective security needs of the Indo-Pacific to prevent war with China.
Absolutely. Michael Shoebridge, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders, as always, with your insights there on China and the Port of Darwin. Coming up, lots more. We've got Rita's Reality Check. Don't go anywhere. We've got Army Horowitz joining us later as well. Lots more here on Outsiders. Don't go away.
You're watching Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan Dean, James Morrow, and I'm Rita Panhy. Coming up shortly, we'll be speaking to an outsider's favourite, Army Horowitz. But first, is the tide against far-left lunacy turning? Well, not as much as we'd like. Sadly, the woke mind virus has taken a firm hold on the culture, from academia to Hollywood to the corporate world. But there are promising signs, and I'm going to bring you two recent examples of corporations walking away from that ideological capture. And in both cases, it was a backlash from the public that led to that retreat. This week, we learned that Disney has delayed the release of its much-mocked Snow White reimagining, you know, the new PC version of the classic fairy tale starring this insufferable girl with the seven dwarves replaced with an ethnically and gender-diverse group of magical creatures to avoid reinforcing stereotypes. That was the explanation from Disney. But after much mockery, this week, Disney not only announced the release date of Snow White would be delayed by at least a year, but it also appears to be reinstating the dwarves. Oh no, what about those harmful stereotypes? I do hope the dwarves are at least racially diverse and non-binary. Now, the studio claims that the writers' strike is behind the delay, but those in the know say that's not the case. The production is being dramatically changed to avoid being another box office disaster. You see, audiences don't want lame, woke movies pushing leftist ideology. That's obvious. And a point the creators of South Park drive home in their latest work.
Why are they replacing every single character with someone who is diverse? But then Kenny's like, it's not our fault, it's because of Kathleen Kennedy. But then Kathleen Kennedy's just like, it, make it more lame. And everyone in town is like, no, please, Kathleen Kennedy, stop ruining everything. But Kathleen Kennedy is all like, put another gay diverse woman in it, make it more lame. And the Disney stock just keeps going down and down and down. And then Bob Iger is all like, no, what's going on with my stocks? No, Kathleen Kennedy.
Kathleen Kennedy, the president of the Disney-owned Lucasfilm, but I'm sure the problems at Disney extend far beyond her. Let's see if this Snow White rethink is going to be a trend in their other productions. Another recent example of a corporate going from woke to broke to ultra-conservative is Bud Light. Now, we all know of the lunacy that saw the brand being promoted by trans activist Dylan Mulvaney, and how that cost the company billions, not millions, billions. Well, they tried to rebuild their image. There were all sorts of statements released and a number of pro-America, pro-blokey ads, even one starring Taylor Swift's latest dude, Travis Kelce, but all those ads bombed because, one, they were lame and certainly not enough to convince their once loyal customer base to forgive them. So this week, Bud Light went full-blown MAGA. Yes, they teamed up with the most politically incorrect partner possible, the UFC. This is a company led by Dana White. There's nothing PC about the UFC, its fighters, or its fans, or its owners. Coincidentally, this is a hilarious video that Trump posted just 4 days ago featuring him at UFC fights. President Joe Biden also makes an appearance. Yes, Bud Light has gone from a trans activist to the UFC. It shows the power that conservative consumers have and what can happen when they actually exercise that power. Something for our corporates who lined up to back the racist voice to keep in mind. Now, before I go, I want to bring you some footage of protesters who I'm reliably informed are the usual socialist suspects at every leftist protest in Melbourne, from BLM to global warming, who are now turning up to pro-Palestinian rallies to intimidate members of the independent media, including TikTokers, from filming what is really happening. That's TikToker. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at one of these.
What are you trying to do? Are you trying to block me off? Just getting blocked off.
Yep, that's TikToker Mr. Sakant, who has more than 150,000 followers on that platform. And he was trying to film a protest in Melbourne when miscreants decided that they were going to physically stop him.
Excuse me, I'm just trying to walk through. I'm just trying to get through here. I've got a barricade against me, my friend. I'm actually just trying to get through. Look at this.
Now, those people are physically impeding his progress, his right to walk a public street and film a protest. But far more disturbing than the illiberal, thuggish behaviour of the leftist protesters is the response from Victoria police officers who, instead of protecting that man's rights, instead join in the intimidation and accuse him of upsetting those who are tormenting him.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Finding out what you're doing.
All right, yeah, we're just filming.
Not causing any trouble, are you?
Well, no, they're not letting me stand where I'm supposed to stand.
Just make sure you don't upset people.
I'm not upsetting anyone.
Cross the line, you won't be moved on.
100%. I want to know what they're doing.
We told you, you understand, so you upset people.
You know what's going on, okay? I really don't. I honestly do not.
We'll leave it to it, but I warned you.
There you go. In Victoria, it's mob rule. Don't go upsetting thugs or the cops will have you. This is what happens when the police force becomes hopelessly politicised.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rita. Well, hundreds of New Yorkers have been arrested after protesting in Grand Central Station yesterday, calling for a ceasefire in the Hamas-Israel war. Take a look at this footage. Now, many of those protesting were New York Jews protesting against Israel. Talk about the Darwin Awards. Now, joining us now from Israel is filmmaker Ami Horowitz. Great to see you, Ami, as always. What did you make of the New York, a large contingency of the New York Jewish community there protesting against the actions of the Israeli government? How did that sit with you, Ami?
Yeah, I mean, not well, but I will say this, that, yes, the Jews in New York tend to skew very liberal. But I would say for the most part, Jews who have had a variety of opinions on things domestic, political domestic, Trump, Biden, what have you, have all pretty much rallied around Israel, which is, by the way, not often what's happened. I think that this has been kind of a galvanizing effect for Jews across America, even liberal Jews in New York. So I think those people you saw there were definitely an outlier. But when I went to the Columbia University rally, yeah, there were a number of Jews who were with them, but there was a counter protest where you had, hundreds of Columbia students all together singing peace songs. By the way, they're singing peace songs as the Columbia protesters are singing violent, even genocidal chants, like from the river to the sea, right? And what does the river to the sea mean? That's their chant. They chant every time. From the river, which is the Jordan River, to the Mediterranean Sea. What do you have in between? The Jewish state of Israel. So, yeah, that's the difference between the two sides right there.
James.
Well, and I mean, the thing is, that protest in Grand Central Station, it was 100,000 people plus, so it's more than just, some left-wing Jews who are, say, the Jewish population, as I say, all over the spectrum on this, as are many Muslims that we don't hear from. But are you concerned, though, that this huge push of protests at Grand Central, in London, on university campuses, is really doing Hamas's work for it, in that it is essentially granting Hamas legitimacy for its actions by not saying, oh, what they did was bad? They're very equivocal, if at all condemnatory. And in a sense, then, do we have a danger that Hamas, this violent movement, becomes now the legitimate expression of the Palestinian cause?
You are absolutely right. I'll point one thing out before I answer that question, because I think it's important. When you show that video of the Victoria police kind of doing the dirty work for the protesters, the NYPD, very, very different. They do not look kindly on the Palestinian protesters. I mean, they won't say it, but I've spoken to the NYPD. Personally, they are very pro-Israel, thank God. But yes, but the question about granting Hamas legitimacy is a great one, and it's absolutely true. Look, I've been to these protests for many, many years, and I have asked every single one of them, including the ones I just went to at George Washington and Columbia, and I asked them, okay, fine, you stand for Palestine, you condemn Hamas, you condemn, not just condemn Hamas, you condemn the atrocities, the barbarity of what Hamas did to Israeli babies and the elderly, and they would not condemn it. I kid you not, this is not hyperbole, I could not find a single protester who said, I condemn Hamas, but stand with the Palestinians in Gaza. That's not what's happening here. These are people who are supporting Hamas and thereby supporting the atrocities. That's the problem.
Rita.
I think a lot of eyes have been open, Army, across the political spectrum to what's happening in academia in particular, the anti-Semitism on university campuses. Do you think there is going to be a shift? You mentioned how the Jewish community, particularly in places like New York, lean very much left. Do you think there's going to be a political shift in that group when they see that the people that they stand with don't stand with them?
No, I think what you're going to see, and what you're seeing now, and I've called it for years, and for the first time we're seeing it, is that the universities have these massive endowments, right? And all they're looking to do is increase the size of their endowments. And look, let's be honest, the endowments are coming from billionaires. Many of them are pro-Israel. Many of them are Jewish. And these people finally, after years of giving money to this garbage, are finally realizing, well, maybe they're working at cross purposes to us. So we're starting to see a shift in the money, and I think that's good, but only because it helps push the administration. But fear not, this will have no effect on the professors, no effect on the students. All you see actually is a further hardening and radicalization of the professors and the student body. So I think we're going to see this become a bigger problem. I don't think it's going to ease up anytime soon, because what you're seeing is not just pro-Palestinian people. What you're seeing are the intersectional groups are all aligning with them, right? You saw Greta Thunberg with, and the whole climate change mafia are all standing and supporting the Palestinians, the Native Americans, the Black, the Hispanics. Now, again, most Black people, Hispanic people do not stand with them. But of course, the elites that go to these universities, they've all bought into this propaganda, and they're all staying together, and they're only hardening themselves. They're not getting any better.
And Army, as you've mentioned before in some of your films, the funniest one is queers for Palestine or transgenders for Palestine, when we know full well if they rocked up into Gaza, they'd be thrown off the nearest rooftop with or without a war going on. But I also wanted to, unfortunately, I agree with you, the problem goes much further and much deeper, and part of the problem is these students end up in positions of power. Take, for example, Karine Jean-Pierre. I imagine she was a student at some university or other, and she is now Joe Biden's press secretary. Watch, Army, this classic bit of moral equivalency or even displacement, where she's asked about anti-Semitism, but then answers by talking about hate crimes against Muslims. Have a look.
Level of concern right now about the potential rise of anti-Semitism in light of everything that's going on in Israel?
So a couple of things. We have not seen any credible threats. Muslim and those perceived to be Muslim have endured a disproportionate number of hate-fueled attacks. And certainly President Biden understands that many of our Muslim, Arab Americans and Palestinian American loved ones and neighbors are worried about the hate being directed at their communities.
So, Army, in the one breath, she dismisses anti-Semitism. No, we've seen no proof of any of that, and then fabricates this entire kind of anti-Muslim world that's going on. Your experience in America, is she talking through a hat?
Why did you make me sit through that clip again? I mean, look, let's okay. She claimed that she misheard it. I mean, you heard the question. The question was not mumbled. The question was very, very clear. And I have yet to hear her mishear another question prior. That's the only one she magically misheard. But let me say something very clear about the data. There are 5-to-1 attacks, Jewish versus Muslim. This is not an Islamic issue. This is a Jewish issue. 5 times more attacks on Jewish people than Muslim people in this country. Yet, of course, she pivoted the thing to talk about Muslim attacks because that's out of their playbook. That's what they're reading. They can't do an audible and change in midstream. It goes against their narrative. She did that. I'm sorry. She did not misheard. She pivoted specifically because she didn't want to talk about the uncomfortable truth that Jews are being attacked by people from the left. That's the issue.
And Rita, we were talking earlier, Rita was saying the question, do you think there will be those traditional left-leaning Jews? Many in Australia, I've had arguments, I know Rita and James have, left-leaning Jews who start to see, oh, hang on, maybe the left aren't our great friends. We're certainly seeing it happening in Australia. Do you think it will happen in America?
Well, no. I think, unfortunately, I'd like to say yes, but I think that this too will pass. And I think ultimately they're going to go back to their political priors. I don't think there'll be a significant shift. I think it will have a certain effect for sure, but not one large enough, I think, to make any kind of significant dent. I'll tell you this, though, that if you go to Florida and you ask gun shops who are buying your guns, they'll tell you liberal Jews are coming in and buying guns. So if that's some kind of precursor, maybe that's good to hear. I'm not sure.
Ami Horowitz, always great to chat to you. Thanks so much for coming on Outsiders, and stay safe there. Fascinating. Coming up next, Wacademia, lefty lunacy. Lots to talk about here on Outsiders. Don't go away. Back in a tick. Welcome back. You're watching Outsiders with Rita, A Diamond is Forever, Panahi, James, Think Outside the Bun, Morrow, and myself, Rowan, Don't Leave Home Without It, Dean. Yes, back in my advertising days in the 80s and 90s, the most successful advertising agencies like Saatchi's and Ogilvy's, and here in Australia, even good old Singos, made their money by coming up with catchy slogans to sell products. That was basically it. But not anymore. Imagine my astonishment at learning this week that one of Australia's supposedly top creative advertising agencies, M&C Saatchi, were paid around $1 million during COVID by the federal government in Canberra, $1 million of your money, not to come up with creative ideas or slogans, as you might think an advertising agency would do, but rather to spy on you and me and any other Australians on social media and then dob us in to the government, who then dobbed us into big tech in order to silence us. Have a listen to One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts grilling bureaucrats from the Canberra Home Office, the swamp, this week.
The department has paid more than $1 million to M&C Saatchi for their part in this COVID-19 censorship referral program. Did M&C Saatchi determine what was misinformation, or did the department?
Well, we'll go into it, but now I know what the M&C and M&C Saatchi stands for: meddling and censoring. So what's the story here? Listen to this Yes Minister-style bureaucratic waffle and, dare I say, arse covering from the Department of Home Affairs.
Well, the witnesses at this table do not actually know what's going on in your department, as they refer parliamentarians for censorship. Is your department out of control?
Senator, our department is happy to respond to your question. Mr Smythe can take you through the detail.
Senator, I think as referenced in previous hearings, the department is not in the business of censoring. We referred posts to social media platforms to take action at their discretion as to whether or not they felt that particular posts breached their service standards.
Sorry, what?
So you're enabling censorship, and you are serving the social media giants, Meta in particular, with the provision of their own services.
Senator, as I previously said, we are not in the business of censoring.
But you enabled censorship.
No, Senator. We provide referrals to social media companies in order that they can decide whether or not the activity meets their own service standards.
So you're providing a service to Meta. Do you charge them an invoice?
This is disgraceful. Up to $1 million of your hard-earned dollars being spent to create this roundabout, nudge-nudge, wink-wink pathway for the government to signal to big tech via M&C Saatchi what material it wants censored without specifically saying so that they can't be blamed. And big tech happily obliging. This included, by the way, actually censoring a member of parliament. This is the deep swamp and the deep state at work, and it is outrageous. Listen to this turgid Sir Humphrey-like explanation and ask yourself, how much are we paying these clowns?
We operated on advice and criteria that were provided to the department from the Department of Health. That was then assessed through a service provider that we had, M&C Saatchi. The department then reviewed the references from M&C Saatchi as to whether or not they were likely to have been in breach of the service standards of particular platforms. And then the platforms were informed of that, and they made their own decisions.
Your money, your hard-earned tax dollars that you sweat and toil for, going to pay for garbage like that. Sack the lot of them. But this is what it will be like, even worse, on steroids, if Labor's misinformation and disinformation bill gets up. The same process. The government signalling to big tech what to censor and then washing its hands and going, oh, nothing to do with us. Big tech's doing it. Free speech is dying before our very eyes in this country, and we have to stop them. Oh, and here's the standard get-out clause, or should I say get-out-of-jail-free card, used to justify every single abuse of power that we saw during COVID. They're saving lives. Have a listen.
Are you in the business of helping large global multinationals conduct their own affairs?
Senator, we're in the business of looking after public health and safety, and it was in the middle of a global pandemic where a lot of people were dying.
Have you received legal advice on whether your department has breached the implied freedom of political expression with this program?
No, Senator.
Why not?
Why not? Worse, we now know that many of those so-called wrong posts, wrong as judged, by the way, by some pimply art director over at M&C Saatchi, and then censored in this bureaucratic game of snakes and ladders, were in fact not misinformation. They were the truth. They were censoring material that was true and, who knows, could possibly have saved lives. So don't give me that saving lives rubbish. Sack the lot of them. Start again, seriously, today. And thank goodness for senators like Malcolm Roberts and Alex Antic, who was there, for exposing this outrageous misuse of power and misuse of money.
There's a lot of money going to an international advertising firm.
So, Senator, you've asked us to take that on notice. We'll be happy to do so.
This was your reply.
Keep up the work, Senator. Now, I read an excellent article in The Australian yesterday by Rabbi James Kennard, where he explores how the same hatred that fueled the Holocaust is fueling today's deadly hatred and attacks on Jews. A hatred that has led, according to Dr. Quanta Ahmed, who I'll be chatting to in a second, from Tel Aviv, the vile murders of over 1,000 Jews on October 7th, which she says is in no uncertain terms a genocidal crime against humanity, that it was. After the 1940s Holocaust, people often referred to the quotation, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing," as a way of explaining how something so horrific could have happened. Well, writes James Kennard in The Australian yesterday, it's worse than that. He says evil flourishes when there are 4 concentric circles of groups of people enabling it. First, obviously, there needs to be the people capable of performing the evil deeds, the murderers. In Germany, it was the SS and the Gestapo. On October 7th, we saw it was the terrorists of Hamas on a bloodthirsty genocidal rampage against civilian Jews. Then, says James, there is a wider circle of those who are aware of the evil, yet support and celebrate it, fueled by hatred of the victims. Well, that sounds pretty much like those here in Sydney on the steps of the Opera House yelling out "Gas the Jews" and "F the Jews" the day after 1,000 innocent Jewish women, children, babies and the elderly were tortured and butchered. Next in James's ever-widening concentric circles who enable evil to occur are the ones who do not support the heinous acts themselves, but consider them to be somehow justified or excusable. Here's one of the very worst of those.
This most recent violence does not come in a vacuum. The reality is that it grows out of a long-standing conflict with a 56-year-long occupation and no political end in sight.
What a grub, Antonio Guterres. Now there he is apportioning blame for the orgy of death and violence against Jews, on the Jewish people themselves. Worse, the United Nations followed that disgraceful statement up by voting on a motion to condemn Hamas over those terrorist attacks and then cheered when the motion was defeated.
Draft Amendment A/ES10 L26 is not adopted.
Unbelievable. It is now time for us to abandon the United Nations. Let's just get out of it, pull out of it altogether. It is a vile, corrupt institution financed by our tax dollars where mass murderers and despots dictate to the rest of us. We and the other Western nations should get out of the United Nations immediately, set up something new on our own. But I digress. The fourth circle, says Rabbi James Kennard, are those who feel obliged to remain strictly neutral in this, what is a battle between good and evil. Well, we all know plenty of them who happily tout their moral equivalency, including many, if not all, Labor political leaders. I'll leave it to you to decide whether Tony Burke sits in that fourth circle.
It's a Palestinian flag. And it's a flag that gives people the chance to know that there is recognition and not selective grief. We can't say we only grieve for certain people who are slaughtered.
There's your moral equivalency. What a disgrace. Now, a friend of mine sent me this commentary the other day. It was written by an American called Chris Bullard, and it was the top voted commentary on the Wall Street Journal website. Here's what he said, and I'm quoting his words because they are so good. Quote, "I am not a Jew and I'm not a citizen of Israel. I haven't even visited Israel. I don't trace my religion back to a holy site in Jerusalem, and I don't have a problem with Arabs or Muslims or Christians. I've read about Abraham, Moses, David and Solomon," writes Chris, "the Umayyads, the Abbasids and the Ottomans. I know about the British, the Balfour Declaration, Ben Gurion and Golda Meir. I know a bit about the Six-Day War and the Intifada," writes Chris. "I might not have any personal stake in the Holy Land, but humanity certainly does. And I'm a human being. The women, men, children, elderly people and soldiers who were kidnapped, tortured, raped, humiliated and murdered by Hamas in sovereign Israel were human beings too. Those who did it to them are not. Imagine what kind of rational and ethical gymnastics you have to do to justify the cold-blooded murder of teenagers at a music festival, or watching a child, perhaps 5 years old, being prodded with a stick and made to cry for his mother in Hebrew while children of a similar age laugh and mock him. We don't know what that child's fate, we don't know what his fate is, and for all we know, what followed may have been much, much worse. It is depraved. To even enter a conversation about these disgraceful facts with a rehearsed retort about territory or Gaza being an open-air prison reeks of moral bankruptcy. If you wail and scream about your land, dignity, rights, oppression and poverty, but you are willing to murder, rape, kidnap, torture or humiliate children, then I don't have to listen to your reasons. When the video footage, photographs and stories of October 7th's carnage come not from, Israeli propaganda or whatever, but from the Hamas terrorists themselves, then how am I to read anything else into it but that you want credit for these atrocities? You want me to know that you did it. You want me to know you are proud of having done it. You want me to see you for who you are. Well, I do, writes Chris Bullard. So if you swarmed the Israeli embassy in London waving Palestinian flags and calling for genocide, if you went down to Times Square to celebrate a victory for decolonization against apartheid Israel, if you sang along to Gas the Jews chants at the Sydney Opera House or hung a one settler, one bullet Palestinian flag over Greyston Bridge in Johannesburg, then you're telling me who you are. Well, I see you, says Chris Bullard, and you're my enemy. End of quote. That's Chris Bullard writing just a comment there on the Wall Street Journal. You may or may not agree with Chris Bullard and what he wrote, but if you do, well, we can't disappear into James Kennard's four circles. We must speak up. My good friend Toby Young of the Free Speech Union in Britain has set up an October declaration, which some 200 celebrities have already signed, condemning anti-Semitism. We need the same here. Well, Hamas is launching its war of terror from a command centre under Gaza's largest hospital. It is holding thousands of Palestinians as human shields to protect their own selfish, terror-inflicting agenda. This is the international war crime the world should be so concerned about. Independent Women's Forum fellow Dr. Quanta Ahmed joins me now. Quanta, it's great to see you. You're in Tel Aviv. You've actually been on the ground and seen some of the devastating aftermath of those October 7th murders and savagery. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I've been actually here almost 10 days now, and I came specifically to witness what I believed was a crime against humanity that was prosecuted by Hamas on the Jewish people, on the Israeli people on October 7th. It's being described worldwide as a massacre. It was much more than a massacre. It was a genocidal act. What I have seen directly being in the places of genocide, including Kibbutz Be'eri, meeting with the survivors and taking eyewitness accounts of adult survivors and children survivors. This was most definitely systematic extermination, lethal eliminationist anti-Semitism, which is at the center of the charter of Hamas. This is at the center of what drives Islamist jihadism. This is much more than any kind of conflict over the future of a Palestinian state or the concept of occupation. Though remember, Israel is not occupying Gaza since almost 2006. Gaza has been governed by Hamas. This has all the hallmarks of a crime against humanity. To give you a little indication of some of what I've seen, I was standing inside the autopsy room, standing alongside pathologists while they made an external examination of a body that could not be identified in Abu Kabir, which is the home of the National Institute of Forensics here in the Tel Aviv area. And the body that we're looking at had multiple methods of execution: bullet holes, knife wounds, and evidence of maceration of the legs that could be achieved with a motor vehicle driven over the person. We've also seen, and I've been shown, evidence that bodies came in to forensics with their wrists tied, not only with zip ties, as you've been hearing about in the news, but with electrical cable, like from a toaster or a hairdryer. These people were systematically exterminated in cold blood, hand to hand, with genocidal intent. Genocide does not depend on the number of people that died, that we know 1,408 people so far, I think, have died in Israel, and many thousands wounded. This was a crime against humanity, and there is enormous amounts of evidence that that was the intention. One last point, I was in a closed briefing with the IDF where we were shown a 43-minute video of raw footage of Hamas body cam, dash cam, other evidence. They clearly came with intention for systematic extermination and to document that. That indicates premeditation of genocide, and then to disseminate that documentation for maximum terror on the Jewish population. We are witnessing a genocide conducted by Islamists on the Jewish and Israeli people, in genocide which also claimed Muslim lives.
Quanta, what you say is just horrific. Have you... Tell us, I guess you're a doctor, you're experienced to seeing these scenes and these situations, but what is it like for the first responders, for the people, for those doctors and nurses and other people who have to witness these horrors? What is it like for them?
Thank you for asking. In fact, that's been some of the most devastating encounters that I've experienced. And it's not just doctors, pathologists, anthropologists, or maxillofacial experts. I also spent time talking to the Israeli police that are performing detective work and crime scene investigation. I talked to crime scene investigators in Israel that have literally solved thousands of murders over decades, and they were confronted with this. The human toll and the impact on human beings in Israel is unimaginable. Many times I'm just arriving somewhere in order to learn what I can, and as the person begins talking to me, just the tears are in every individual that's worked with this. It doesn't matter how hardened or how seasoned a police officer, a soldier, a detective, a doctor, a surgeon, a first responder is. It's a colossal bereavement, a colossal psychological trauma. And remember, we're only about 3 weeks after the event. And so we're still in acute trauma here in Israel. The post-trauma is going to begin in 1 to 3 months. I'm already noticing little children in the households where I've been staying are not able to sleep. They're missing, many of them, their parents. Also, 360,000 people have volunteered to sign up for the IDF. So many families don't have fathers and mothers now because they've gone into the war effort. So this is an enormous psychological trauma. And on top of that, we have the plight of the hostages. The hostages were taken by Hamas, by Islamist jihadists, to inflict maximum pain, taking babies, taking elderly people. The only purpose for that is to inflict continued pain and continued terror. I had to sit and listen to a very senior physician talk about how all of the country, including those in her field, were working around the clock. And she also observed that's the only place she feels she has control or safety or predictability. Leaving work and returning to home, she feels she cannot authentically reassure her own children of their safety. That is terror at work.
Quanta, what you say is just devastating, and yet as you're there in Tel Aviv right now, people are running, there are sirens going, people are running for cover. We've seen that overnight. The sheer obscenity, I don't know how you cope with it, Quanta, when you realise that when you get back to New York, you'll be confronted with students and demonstrations and politicians and people at Central Station and who knows where else, blaming the Jews for what is going on. How people can cope with that sort of vile hypocrisy is beyond me. Quanta Ahmed, stay safe, and thank you so much for speaking to us from Tel Aviv. And it is great work you do, and we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you so much for coming on Outsiders. Stay safe. After the break, David Gillespie on the climate craziness which has hit the Hunter Valley. Plus James's donkey vote in a tick. Don't go away, Outsiders.
Hello, you're watching Outsiders. I'm James Morrow here with Rita, you looking at me, Panahi, and Rowan, forget about it, Dean. And I'm here to bring you some great news from New York City, my old hometown, where some of the locals have taken the sort of stand against one of the most bizarre behaviors we have seen in the wake of Hamas's murder of 1,400 Israelis, a kidnapping of 200 more. You see, in the weeks since October 7, people have been quite rightly putting up posters of the names and faces of those taken hostage by Hamas in an effort to keep those innocents and the brutality of their Palestinian captors front of mind. And the problem is, though, that as quickly as they go up, some jerks go around tearing them down. Often, not always, but often this is done by loopy white progressives, useful idiots, whose pronouns would quickly become was-were if they were to spend 5 seconds with the terrorists they lionize. Like, for example, these students at Boston University who were confronted by a fellow student for ripping down posters reminding people of the hostages and their plight.
Are you defending terrorism, really? You guys really defending terrorism? Cowards.
Dude, you literally know I'm Jewish. Like, I've been...
That's not true. That makes it much better.
No, but I'm saying, like, you have no right to tell people that their beliefs are wrong or that
it's not a belief.
No,
condemning Hamas is not a belief. You don't have to believe to think that raping someone is wrong. You don't have to believe that someone getting kidnapped, that babies getting beheaded, that 85-year-old grandmother is getting kidnapped. It's wrong. That's not a belief. That's not an opinion. And if it is, of course, I don't respect it.
I mean, this is what they're teaching in the schools now. Imagine being Jewish and thinking Hamas are the good guys here who need some public relations help. And then there was this member of the rainbow alphabet multiple political badge-wearing community at the University of Southern California who was caught doing the same thing.
Excuse me, why are you taking those off? Why are you taking those off?
Because it's causing the conflict to be worse.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
By you taking those off, you know what it does? It shows that Jewish victims are not okay. Excuse me, why are you taking those off? Do you really need to study about stuff?
Alone, please?
No, can you not take this off?
I already took
My
them.
friend's
They're
one of those
making the
200 people.
conflict worse.
My friend is one of those people, and you're taking them off?
That's sad, but I don't see how that helps the conflict.
Now, again, this is real chickens for KFC territory here. By someone Hamas would immediately sign up to the local no-parachute skydiving team if they had half a chance. So hats off, or hard hats off, to these New York construction workers who displayed more moral clarity than most of our political leaders at the United Nations and too many in our media as well, when they confronted this chucklehead who was going around Queens, New York, tearing down posters calling for the return of captured Israelis. And you're going to enjoy this one here.
All right, I'm a veteran. I'm telling you. All right, don't do it. I'm not Jewish. He's not Jewish. I don't know if he is or not. Doesn't matter. This is in the USA. It's New York City. You don't have a right to touch that shit. This is a free country. You can wave your Palestine flag and say death to the Jews or America whenever you want. But we can put up signs, okay? Then don't rip that down. You are doing something. You're offending us. Yeah, you are. When you throw that on the floor, you're littering the city. In a minute, I'm going to litter the floor with you. You have a proof? So move the on. Do you have proof they're not kidnapped? No, so shut the up. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. I know that's what you want. I'm dying to put you in the hospital. Come on, you piece of
Forget about it. I almost tell you, it almost brings a tear to this New Yorker's eye seeing that. And happily, it seems that these construction workers aren't the only ones outraged. And it seems like at least some of these sign rippers are learning there are consequences for supporting terrorist groups that butcher, kidnap, and rape. Have a look here. This woman, wearing the full keffiyeh while walking her dog, was seen tearing down posters in Massachusetts, very liberal state that, and was identified by people who knew who she was. And it turns out She was local endodontist Zina El Adib, and her bosses gave her the sack when they found out what she was up to. It was the same story for this fellow, oddly also a dentist, named Ahmed El-Kousa, seen tearing down posters in Miami. His bosses at CG Smile promptly gave him the sack too, saying in a statement, quote, "We are very sad to see this situation upon waking up. Our office, CG Smile, is not in favor of any actions taken by Dr. El-Moussa. We do not support terrorist groups, actions, or supporters. He has been removed from our staff, all of our social media pages and groups, and CG Smile does not support terrorist groups, actions, or supporters," they went on. And I tell you what, great. Because I haven't seen so many anti-Israel dentists since Laurence Olivier played war criminal Gel in Marathon Man. Is it safe? Now, you know, of course, though, that we here on Outsiders hate cancel culture. We do. But before anybody writes to it and says, "Oh, what about this?" This is not about getting shut down for a political belief. This is about the support, doing the public relations work for defending, tacitly or explicitly, terrorists, Hamas. And as the old saying goes, play stupid games, play stupid prizes. It's nice to see that in a world gone mad, at least a few people have as much sense as a New York construction worker.
Fantastic, James. I was hoping you were going to play that great clip, one of the great films, Marathon Man, Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier. Fantastic. Now, the Labor government is continuing to push its green agenda. Don't worry, we haven't forgotten about climate change here on Australians. Compromising energy security in the name of climate change. But sensible residents in the Hunter Valley are fighting back, protesting the government's plan to erect these giant offshore wind farms, these monstrosities off the pristine waters of Port Stephens and Newcastle. Joining us to discuss the latest is Nationals MP David Gillespie. Great to see you, David. Now, there have been paddle against wind farms, there's been protests. People are realising that these windmills are going to have a negative impact on fisheries, on tourism, I guess on all sorts of recreational activities, as well as being extraordinarily ugly and inefficient. David, tell us your thoughts. What's happening up there?
Well, there's universal opposition to the concept of these offshore floating wind farms. They are a testament to absolute madness. They will become rusting hulks, an impediment to commercial sea traffic, to the fishing industry, to the blue water economy of whale watching. The whales themselves, there's 10,000 of them that will have to cope with all the seismic testing and all this seabed disruption, the chains. There's a subterranean mesh of power grids and a huge exclusion zone around it. And it's right off the northern entry into the Port of Newcastle and off Port Stephens and up almost to Seal Rocks, adjacent to two federal and state marine parks. Dotted nearby are Ramsar protected islands. It is a nature's wonderland on a worldwide scale. It's pretty rare to see something as pristine and untouched as this. But also, it affects national security because it makes our energy system more dependent on the weather. It's absolute madness, Rowan. I don't know what planet these people are on. They think they're saving the world, but they're destroying Australia's energy security, misallocating billions of dollars to these offshore companies. They've run out of places to put wind farms in Europe, so they're coming down here to test run these floating ones. And the prodigious use of steel, cement, critical minerals, like everywhere I look, it's just nonsensical. But anyhow, Chris Bowen and the Labor Party are steamrolling through, and they're about set to produce feasibility licences, and all the seismic testing and damage to whales will start.
Rita.
Now, David, we've had the coalition have a victory with The Voice. That was a hard-fought-for debate, but you staked a position, you articulated why you were in the no camp, and you gave the Australian people a clear choice, and they made that choice. Why are we not seeing that in this arena? Why are we not seeing when it comes to energy policy, when it comes to climate change? Yes, you just made a lot of sense, but at the end of the day, you're part of a coalition that has a net zero policy as well. So how about actually giving the Australian people a clear choice between cheap, reliable energy and this renewables folly that's going to cost us a lot more than just high bills?
Oh, Rita, you and I are on a unity ticket. You're stealing all my words.
She does that, David. Get used to it, mate. Get used to it.
Yeah, no, the actual construct of net zero by 2050 is just pie in the sky. Look, unfortunately, or I deal in the real world. There's been billions of euros, Deutschmarks, US dollars, English pounds, Aussie dollars. The whole world has gone crazy trying to think that in the space of 20 or 30 years, we can unhook from fossil fuels. We're still using for our total energy about 94% from fossil fuels. The only realistic way to disconnect the world's economies and advancement of human beings is to get cheap, affordable, reliable electricity. Nuclear energy is one way of doing that, but highly efficient, low emissions coal plants in Asia are powering and keeping people warm and allowing their economies to go from undeveloped to developed. Look at India, look at countries in Asia. We're doing the reverse. We advanced in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and up to now, and now we're going backwards to low energy density sources that are randomly variable, reliant on the weather or the day and night. Like, is everyone going to wake up one day and realise, hey, it's cloudy and windy across New South Wales and Queensland. It's called, a big low trough or an East Coast low. And hey, presto, everything stops working because we've run out of batteries after 4 or 5 hours and we've run out of wind. Look, we need to keep our remaining baseload power stations operating till we get a sensible replacement for them. Either upgrade them, make them highly efficient, or go nuclear. That's the logical thing. I'm not saying I'm against renewables. I'm just saying you can't base a whole economy on renewables. They can be part of the mix. They can be like the icing on the cake, but you can't make the whole cake out of renewables.
That's a very tasty analogy there. But, David, I want to ask you about the politics of all this, a kind of a double-barreled question here. Number one, why are they proposing that these offshore wind farms go off of places like Port Stephens when you've got, the urban conurbations where that power would go? Why are they going off the coast of Manly and Wentworth and Bondi and places like that? Firstly, and secondly, does the coalition think, I know that Peter Dutton has been up to the Nelson Bay area, the seat of Patterson a couple of times in the last month. Is this going to be a big issue, do you think, in the next federal election, which could be called as soon as late next year?
Look, undoubtedly it will be, but across the country, this is the most obvious and latest canary in the coal mine, so to speak, or the latest wind tower, in nature. Look, people have realised the folly of it all, and it's going to destroy the blue water economy. There's $1 billion worth of fisheries catch coming out of this proposed area. And underneath these floating turbines, there'll be a mesh of power grids, big anchors that are huge bits of geoengineering. They're going to have to scrape the floor to put 200-tonne anchor points down. They'll rust. Imagine what would happen. It's about 1,900 square kilometres, the area, rated for 5,000 megawatts. That means 312 of these absolute giant wind floating on the waves, anchored by huge change, and then electrical cords going into the mainland. You won't be able to fish in it. You won't be able to have coal ships or fuel ships coming anywhere near it, sailing boats. The whales will be disrupted, all the electrical currents, all the clinking and the noise of the chains, let alone all the seismic testing and blowing up the seafloor to make them get solid anchors. It's just bad everywhere. Now, look, people have realised that's a problem, but so have all the people in Newcastle, who realise it's their economy. The people in Port Stephens are irate. We had between 2,000 and maybe 2,500 people turn up on Saturday morning. Myself and other speakers, including Barnaby Joyce, we have called it out because this is happening not just off Mile Coast and Port Stephens, it's happening down on the south coast, off Gippsland, off Western Victoria and into areas of South Australia. And hey presto, all this stuff is going to disrupt all those fishing grounds, all that traffic. The geostrategic consequences of it is the most scary thing though, because really trying to run a country based on whether it's windy or sunny.
You're 100% correct. You're absolutely.
And we are going to have, it's just bizarre that this fairy tale mirage has got as far as it's got.
Exactly.
You know,
I'm going to have to jump in there, David.
Advocated for it before have changed their mind.
Yeah, exactly. Now, thanks so much, David. And I'm going to mention the rock lobsters as well in Ice Age Watch in a tick. Well done to all those people up there in Newcastle and Port Stephens for speaking up against these monstrosities. Thanks, David Gillespie. More coming up. Ice Age Watch in a tick. Hello, you're watching Outsiders Weather and the Skeptics Ice Age Watch, the show that believes in protecting the animal kingdom rather than sacrificing God's beautiful creatures on the altar of the global boiling climate change renewables cult. What on earth am I talking about? Well, let's take one of nature's most bounteous animals, such as the much-loved Irish cow.
Like a stampede. They love that music. Play it again for them, so I'll give them another tune.
Yes, you see, Irish cows love Irish music, but alas, thanks to the insane climate change cult, many of those same cows may soon genuinely have to face the music. According to the Irish Examiner, unless something is done to prevent the carnage, up to 41,000 cows could be slaughtered in Ireland over the next 10 weeks. Why? To meet global warming EU-imposed nitrogen reduction mandates. This savagery, slaughtering 41,000 cows, is due to changes in Ireland's nitrate derogation requirements under EU climate change guidelines. Farmers affected will have 3 ways to meet the reduced limits on nitrates, including increasing the amount of land they have. Oh yeah, that's easy, isn't it? Yep. Finding someone to take slurry from their holdings. Okay, sounds like a job for someone else. Or reducing animal numbers. Cork South West Senator Tim Lombard, who is a farmer, slammed what will be an animal welfare catastrophe. But, as I always say, why just stop at killing music-loving Irish cows? Surely the climate cult can do better than that. Yes, indeed. You see, the renewables climate cult also has a proven track record of killing beautiful eagles. Indeed, last year a wind farm company admitted killing 150 of these magnificent birds in the United States and was fined $8 million. According to Business Insider, quote, a renewable energy company was given a 5-year probation and ordered to pay more than $8 million in fines after the deaths of 150 bald and golden eagles on their wind turbines. Almost all of them died from being hit by the blades. But I always say, why stop at killing music-loving Irish cows and beautiful, magnificent eagles? Surely the renewables climate cult can do better than that. Instead, indeed, it is suggested they can. According to the New York Post, a documentary produced by Michael Schellenberg, a friend of this program, called Thrown to the Wind, claims that offshore wind farms kill whales too. Here's the trailer.
1,000%. That is the boat. Let's bring it to dead stop. I saw another whale had washed up. It's becoming a pattern. Is it the windmills? Is it the pounding of the seafloor? How many whales is it going to take?
There aren't many places where the North Atlantic right whale can go. It's destined to extinction.
It sounds like they're like it's on pile driving.
United States is looking at is thousands of wind turbines in an area that our whales, our dolphins, our marine life, where they live, where they migrate, where they breed. It's only when they started going into the wind lease areas that we believe that the whales are dying.
So those red dots are whale deaths.
Precisely.
What a scandal.
And here is the chart that Michael was referring to, showing the whale death toll in red dots and the proximity to the locations of wind farms in yellow. Such a map might be of passing interest to the good folk of Newcastle and Port Stephens. Here's a map of Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen's proposed offshore wind farms directly opposite the beautiful pristine waters of Port Stephens and Newcastle in the Hunter Valley region, as we were just discussing with David Gillespie. Areas with amazing fishing and tourism industries and, of course, famous for their migrating whales. This morning, as we speak, and yesterday, concerned residents of Port Stephens were having a paddle against wind farms protest off Birriby Beach. The Nationals MP, David Gillespie, as I said, has expressed concerns that Chris Bowen's offshore wind developments will be a serious risk to the navigation of local and international shipping and boating, impacting whale and dolphin acoustics, migration and pod behaviour, marine bird life and the commercial fishing, tourism and freighting industries. But, I say, why stop at killing much-loved Irish cows, killing beautiful and magnificent bald and gold eagles, killing amazing whales and killing dolphins when the climate renewables cult planned offshore wind farms can also wipe out rock lobsters? According to Renew Economy in August, the South Australian government has dropped a bombshell on the federal government's offshore wind plans, and because it doesn't want to be part of crazy Chris Bowen's Southern Ocean offshore wind zone. The South Australia government says it is worried about the impact that construction will harm fisheries industries in the area, and in particular, the $187 million rock lobster industry, as well as marine life. And they're not alone. Here's New South Wales lobster fisherman Mark Horn speaking to Ben Fordham on 2GB about yet another of Chris Bowen's insane wind farm projects.
There's a micro electric current that goes down these lines, and the studies haven't been proven quite yet that it doesn't interfere with these microbes, and also the migration of the lobsters up the coast on the continental shelf. These electrical currents on the bottom of the ocean has already been proven to put some species in an active stupor.
During the Vietnam War and the deadly Tet Offensive, an unnamed American major was reported to have justified his assault by saying, "We had to destroy the village in order to save it." It would appear, to me at least, that as we increasingly learn the negative impacts that renewables and climate policies are potentially having on everything from cows to whales to dolphins to rock lobsters, our climate change minister might be in need of his own version of the Tet justification. I think I shall call it the Bowen oxymoron. Funny how those two words sit so well together. The Bowen oxymoron. And it goes like this: in order to save Mother Nature, we have to destroy her. Now, if only there was a pop group named specifically after a US bomber that wreaked havoc on Vietnamese villages singing a pop song specifically about threatened species like cows or eagles or whales or rock lobsters. Oh, hang on, there is! Hyperbole. Rita, what have you got for us?
Well, the Israeli TV has taken aim at the BBC and their anti-Israeli bias. And let's have a look at this skit they've put together.
Our Middle East correspondent, Harry Whitegilt.
Good evening, Rachel, from the illegal colony of Tel Aviv. Israeli officials has denied bombing the hospital, but we have video footage showing what really happened indeed.
A absolutely shocking, Harry.
Yeah. We got this video from Hamas, the most credible, not terrorist organization in the world.
Fantastic. Good stuff there, calling it out. Fantastic. Listen, we saw this clip on Twitter as well of a woman tackling the transgender young man, woman, whatever he, she, it, who's trying to put forward the transgender philosophy. A woman comes up. Watch this. This is a great clip.
Any men who have a uterus could menstruate.
A man has an XY. I'm sorry, I'm being so rude. I apologize. But you're incorrect. Because we're talking about anatomy, biology. Like, if you were to have surgery, they need to know what sex you are. So women... That's why she ran off.
No, I said I was crossing at the next line.
This is very serious what's going on in America. They're indoctrinating students to go against their parents. And this is Marxism, this is socialism. I'm very familiar with it. And I want everybody to educate themselves.
What a legend, hey? Isn't she great?
Bravo.
We've got to get her on. We've got to get her on Outsiders. I know.
But she's absolutely right about the Marxism, about what's happening in schools. And I tell you, it's not just members of the black community. Right here in Australia, members of the migrant community are very much sick of this agenda. Most migrants, not all, but many migrants are socially conservative, James, and yet they are expected just to adopt all this nonsense, the 600 different genders.
Well, of course,
you can be whatever pansexual, non-gender conforming, whatever, and they don't want that in the schools. If you want to do that as an adult, good for you, but they don't want their kids indoctrinated.
And, you know, they come from cultures where, amazingly enough, people exist without being confused about their gender, without all of the sort of the woke indoctrination that they see in schools, without being told that their own heritage is terrible. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, along with the sort of all the sort of the sexual gender stuff that must be so confusing to migrants who come here is to come here and then have their kids go to schools where they're told that the country that their parents chose to take them to for a better life is somehow an illegitimate, awful, horrible, racist place that just happened to take these people from other countries in.
Well, talking of immigrants, Iranians in Paris, just have a quick look at this clip. Iranians in Paris, Rita, you'll enjoy this one, showing their support for Israel. Have a look. So there you have it, Rita.
Well, we saw footage from Tehran where they tried to have a minute's silence for Palestine, and all the soccer crowd were making as much noise as they could. Iran and Israel, before the mad mullahs took over, had fairly, good relations.
Absolutely.
The Islamic Revolution.
That's it for Outsiders. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next Sunday morning at 9 a.m. bright and early. Thank you. See ya.